So welcome to the session. What we're going to be covering today is really kind of an embracing of digital transformation, specifically in JD Edwards and then also beyond. We've got 2 hours together. I'll make sure to have a little break somewhere in the middle, depending on how we flow from a timing perspective. So we're not taking 2 hours away straight. So just a quick intro about me. So Brian Rose, I am the Director of Digital Transformation here at Terillium. I have a lot of experience in both on-premise and cloud apps, mostly Oracle, but I've worked with a lot of other third-party, whether it's IoT, planning, MES tools throughout my entire career. I've been doing digital transformation for a long time. It's been I've really enjoyed helping organizations to improve and automate and integrate and make them more efficient with leveraging, whether it's new tools, new technologies, new processes. Like I said, I've been in the supply chain space for 15-ish years now. I actually grew up in a supply chain organization. So since I've been a little kid, I've been running through the supply chain. And really looking forward to kind of talking a little bit about my background and also how digital transformation has helped other organizations throughout today's session. So what's our agenda for today from a high level? So, right, what is digital transformation? I feel like this is a very broad term. It's thrown out in all different types of ways. I'm going to give kind of my spin on what I feel digital transformation is. We'll then get into some of the benefits that I see with digital transformation and what type of ROI organizations are gaining from it. What are some of the key components of digital transformation, specifically the strategy that you're building out? I'm a supply chain guy, so I just want to show some kind of specific technologies that are helping to enhance the supply chain. At that point, what we're going to do is really jump into some use cases. So there are going to be use cases around JD Edwards, outside of JD Edwards, Orchestrator, all the good stuff, right, that everyone I know loves to utilize inside of the tool set. And then finally, we'll talk about kind of a digital transformation roadmap and how do you get there from an organizational perspective. So as we're going through this, I'm going to be doing my best to look at the chat. So if you do have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat and I'll stop periodically and take a look at it. I'd like this to be interactive. And if you have any questions or maybe use cases that you want to understand if JDE, whether it's Orchestrator or a third-party tool can help you, please feel free to add into that. Okay, I'll do my quick commercial just because, and I feel like I need to at least let everyone know. So Terillium, we've been around a long time. We do consulting across all the ERP products from an Oracle perspective, cloud, JD Edwards, NetSuite. We've been in business for 27 years. Really proud of that. We're based in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we do have 180 full-time employees. And the big thing that we like to push here is we don't do a lot of subcontract work. All of our employees are W-2s. So we have a single strategy and we're all kind of working towards the same thing. So if you haven't heard of us, please feel free to hit our website and maybe we could talk to you sometime soon. And like I said, we've been around a long time, 700 plus clients we've worked with. And a lot of them are still trusted partners of ours from a managed services perspective. Okay, so the commercial's over. Now we can get into some of the fun stuff. Like I said, I want to talk about what is digital transformation, what is my spin on it, and what is the history of it as well. So when I think of digital transformation, it's kind of the culmination of two key aspects. Digitization and digitalization. Okay, so if I break those up really quickly. So in the most basic sense, digitization is the process of changing from some type of analog to a digital form. So I'm converting music from a CD or from vinyl to MP3s or paper, right, to digital files saved on a computer. By the conversion of this or representation of physical or non-digital things into a digital format allows me to now use that information in a computer system. So by creating these digital versions of these so-called physical carriers of information allows us to now extract that data. Now we can use it and process it and transmit it to optimize our processes within a system. Now, the second piece of that is digitalization, okay? So this is really the use of digital technologies and that digitized data and how it impacts work getting done. So this is going to transform how customers and companies engage and interact and ultimately create new revenue streams inside of your organization. So if we take a step back and kind of relate back to our example from before, we have gone through the process of converting paper documents to digital files on a computer. Now, digitalization is the initiative that allows me to now utilize that information and transform it and leverage analytical tools to gather insights, actionable knowledge, to really mitigate risk and promote efficiencies on future projects. So at the end of the day, digitization is the process of making existing data and processes digital. Digitalization is embracing that ability and those technologies to capture and assess data and make better decisions and enable new business processes. So those are really the two key components. Now, when we think of digital transformation as a whole, it's a much broader topic. It combines these two, but it's more than just applying technology and also digitizing your data. To borrow a pretty commonly used definition, digital transformation is the profound and accelerating transformation of business activities, processes, competencies, and models to fully leverage the changes and opportunities brought by the digital technologies and their impact across their society in a strategic and prioritized way. So it's not just leveraging technology. It's not just digitizing your data. It's bringing all that together and utilizing new processes and more intelligent technologies to make yourself more efficient. So once again, that's the high level, right? When I think of digital transformation, what does that mean? Now, it's a term that has been thrown around a lot recently, but it's not something that is new. So example, this is kind of a little bit of a history of digitalization or digital transformation across the years. The digitization had started back in the 1950s. So this is, taking a microchip and allowing me to grab data on a computer in an analog format. Now, as we've gotten through the years, World Wide Web comes out. That's a huge driver to allow people to transform. With over half of Americans by the 2000s having personal computers, that digital revolution really started to kick off. Now, in the last 10 to 20 years, this digital transformation has really engulfed a lot of organizations and is one way that people are seeing themselves to create that competitive advantage against their competitors by being able to be more efficient when you're running a product through or knowing why you're having bottlenecks, getting data directly from machines. All of those key points and efficiencies that you gain is only going to positively affect that bottom line. Now, why is it important? What are some of the reasons why digital transformation is something you may want to take on? This is just the high level, So it's, it's driving a different culture of innovation, preparing that company to anticipate any disruption. So I think everyone would agree that the past 2 years from a supply chain perspective has been atrocious from a disruption perspective. And those organizations that were prepared from a digital transformation perspective with gathering insights from different areas were better off, They were much nimbler. They could run what-if analysis. They could see what would happen if we maybe miss a shipment, or what other options do we have, and all that being done through an IoT type of capability. That's ultimately increasing the speed of decisions and demand to the market, So people, wanting products, whether they're talking about it on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, grabbing that type of data from an IoT perspective allows organization to better forecast. Hey, this is something that everyone's talking about. Let's make sure we start to produce more of these. So grabbing data from all those different points are a big piece to driving this digital transformation. It reduces the overall cost, specifically because there's a huge time savings. So by leveraging new technologies and processes and not having to use manual spreadsheets and paper, you're going to make your process more efficient, which ultimately is going to give you a cost reduction from a processing perspective. Just a couple more, right? Like we talked about, it really empowers decision making, and a lot of that is related to the gathering of data. So by me being able to gather all of the data that is important to me, important to my organization, even data I may not know is important, right? By allowing a IoT type of tool or RPA type of tool to go and gather those insights and tell me, hey, this is something you may want to be looking at that you may not have never known beforehand. It really just opens up all different types of doors and opportunities to enable your process. So tons and tons of value and tons of reasons why it's important, specifically, once again, with how the whole COVID has been for the past 2 years for everyone. These are some of the top benefits that we see by adopting that digital model. All these, once again, kind of tie into what I talked about before. We're going to be able to be more efficient. OEE's got to be much better. The changing of customer demands, you're going to be able to better forecast and determine when those are going to happen. Increasing product quality by gathering data from machines, knowing when they may fail, why you're getting bad data out on the other side from a quality perspective. Increasing the design use, and also, reducing the R&D because you're able to kind of grab that data as you're building out products. So these are the top benefits we normally see from a adoption of that digital model. And then lastly, once again, why and some statistics. These are some high-level stats around digital transformation. So it's projected to contribute more than half of the GDP by 2023, which is pretty crazy. This is digital transformed organizations, 53.3 trillion. By 2023, global spending on these services is also supposed to be about $2.3 trillion. And companies that have a higher digitally mature reported 45% revenue growth compared to 15% for lower maturity companies. Now, is this the say all be all and it's the silver bullet? Absolutely not, right? There's also organizations that have probably taken on this initiative and not done as good of a job. So there is humongous upside, but you also need to make sure as you're determining what the goals are and making sure that you have a strategy that is aligned with your organization. And that kind of ties into this next piece. What are the key components of digital transformation? So when we think of a high level key bullet points of things that I would want to make sure to take into consideration when I am thinking of digitally transforming my organization, these are the top 6. So having a strategy and having that leadership involved who can drive that specific strategy. Culture and organizational change. This to me is always somewhat overlooked. How big of a shift you may have to take from an organizational perspective and making sure that the people in that organization are ready for this. Process automation and optimization. So you got to be thinking of when you're building out your strategy, how can I automate? How can I make myself more efficient? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? So that is the time to really drive change and leveraging, once again, different technologies and processes to do that. Data analytics, we talked about analytics earlier. By gathering analytics, you can report and gather information that you may not know from a trends perspective is happening. You may not know why a machine is always failing, or you may not know why a product is coming out and the customer keeps rejecting it. By gathering data and analytics, you can start to leverage that to have usable and relevant data. Technology, to me, this is always my favorite part just because I love the technology aspect, but it's only one part of it, right? So picking the right technologies to leverage to help create a more digitally transformed organization is a key aspect. And then the last thing is you need to make sure that you have tangible results that you're working towards. So when you take on this initiative, what are my goals and how do I mark against those, right? What are the results that I'm looking for? So having an end game, having some KPIs and targets that you're trending towards is crucial to make sure that, one, you're staying on track, and two, you are gaining as much value from this transformation as you may have expected in the beginning. So I'm going to jump through these from a high level, each of these individual pieces. So the first one, once again, is kind of that strategy and leadership. So it probably seems obvious that you need to have a strategy, but oftentimes it's overlooked. But at the end of the day, the how and the who formulates the strategy, and that's what makes it important. So a basic strategy with fitting technologies can help you digitize or even digitalize your business. But transformation, at the end of the day, requires the correct mindset and guidance. Hence, strategy combined with the right leadership is the first and really most crucial component of a digital transformation process. When we think of the type of leaders you're going to want to have a part of this, you're going to want to have people that are change agile leaders. So they want the ability or drive the ability to change rapidly. And they must be willing to try different new technologies and new processes and become a more adaptable and flexible leader. You can't go in and say, this is the approach and this is what we're sticking with. It's always an ever-changing movement. Now, you're going to want to have some key North Stars, right, that you're working towards, but it is a very ever-changing approach. You're going to want to also have some forward-looking vision. So don't just worry about what is happening today. You need to be worried about what is the future vision of the organization. What are we moving towards? What type of products are we building? Do we want to maybe outsource some products because we'll get some efficiencies? Do we need to build a new facility, a new digitally transformed shop floor that can run lights out? You know, there's all different types of forward-thinking approaches that you're going to want to have. And you need to have a clear and coherent strategy which outlines that organizations need today and, once again, in the future. So organization and culture, like I talked about, this is usually something that is heavily looked over when people are building out this transformation strategy. It depends really on not just updating technology or redesigning products. If an organization fails to align its digital transformation efforts with its internal values and behaviors, it has a knock-on effect on that organization's culture. Negative repercussions range from things like slow adoption of that digital technology to loss of market competitiveness, and inevitably maybe even a failure to initiate and realize that digital transformation effort. Like I said earlier, digital transformation is a great goal to tackle. But if you don't have all of your guidelines in place and all of your different key components built out, there's always risk for failure. Some of the core elements of that digital culture is, like we talked about with the strategy, you need to encourage boldness over caution. You need to emphasize more action, less planning, utilizing an agile type of flow. And also values collaboration more than the individual effort. So how a lot of organizations in the past have worked is very siloed approaches, whether it's from a supply chain perspective, siloing procurement and the planners and away from customer service or whatever it is. When you take on this type of challenge, everyone needs to be on the same page and everyone needs to be working from the same playbook to make this as efficient and as effective as possible. So process automation, you know, how many times have you found yourself in the middle of a task, hoping that you can find a simpler way to do it? I think every business has been through that. And there's numerous processes and operations which can be transformed to make these workflows smoother and ultimately easier. So you need to keep business process optimization in your mind when you're building out this strategy. It needs to ensure business process optimization meets the goals that you set for customers, as well as your internal team. So all of these interconnected business processes must be covered in that strategy to make sure that the output can be achieved. So process automation and optimization, this is where, right, you're going to gain all of those efficiencies we talked about earlier. So by taking away clicks or taking away, having to go and check something every hour or whatever it is, and allowing the system and the technology and the analytics to take that over, this is where you're going to gain a lot of that operational efficiency. Data and analytics. So data, like we talked about before, is taken somewhat of a center stage from a digital transformation perspective. It allows us to really eliminate all the assumptions that a lot of people have, and even some of that tribal knowledge. So tribal knowledge is something I hear about all the time when I go into organizations and they say, hey, this is the way we do it, and this is what the data looks like. And it's not based on any type of analytics a lot of the time. It's usually just based on, hey, this is what we know. So by leveraging data and leveraging analytical tools, you kind of move away from that. And it can be things with machine learning. It can be IoT type of functionality, digital twins. These are all of the kind of key behaviors that we see. AI, augmented reality. All of these are key pieces of data and analytics and how we're driving that change and determining what is our organization's actual outputs. And then the technology, like I said, this to me is always my favorite, just because I'm a technology guy. These are some of the key technologies that we see when people think of digital transformation. So ERP usually is still kind of in the hub, right? People are leveraging ERP systems, but they want to have some IoT, some mobile, some machine learning, AI built around them. And these are some of the main drivers for how organizations are gathering that data. Some of this can be done inside of your ERP, some of it can't. It just really depends on what your approach is. And as we get into some of the use cases I'm going to talk about in a little bit, a lot of these can be done with JDE Edwards. There's also options to look outside of JDE. So leveraging new technologies and determining what technologies will fit your goals is a key part of your overarching strategy. And the final piece, like I talked about, is determining what are your results. So what goals am I looking to accomplish with my digital transformation strategy? Am I trying to make us more competitive? Are we looking to reduce the cycle time of a product? Are we looking to reduce our lead times? Are we looking to get rid of or to drop the amount of shipments that we're missing? Whatever it is, these can be organizational change, it can be operational changes, and this is what you determine as you are kind of building out your initial business cases. What are we driving to? What are our KPIs from a process perspective? Now, how does this affect the supply chain? So once again, my background's in supply chain, so just kind of staying on that same vein. Let's think of today's process, and this may not be everyone's today's, but the process of manually gathering data across systems and roles, manual collaboration. I think things like Teams and Jabber and Slack have helped with this, but lots of manual collaboration still happening, whether it's through emails, text messages, phone calls, walking up to someone's desk. Manual what if scenario creation, or maybe not even the ability to do scenario creation in your current system. And then cadence-based planning and decision making, which ultimately means these are the steps I always take versus having a way to make it more automated and continuous type of approach. So if we think of what this looks like in the future, slide back. We now have real-time connections, whether it's through an API or an IoT device or a third-party system. I can now connect directly inside and gather my data. I'm now digitizing and collaborating across my organization. All of my data is now sitting in a singular spot to where I don't have paper everywhere. I'm also able to send messages and collaborate and make sure that if I have an issue maybe with a PO, I can collaborate that to a supplier or collaborate a machining issue with the shop floor. All of that stuff can be done inside of the newer technologies. automating the simulation process. So even going a step further than doing what-if analysis, having the system do some what-if analysis for you based on, once again, where the market's at, customer requests, and having it say, hey, you should buy X amount of raw material because at some point you're going to have to build this. We don't know when it may be. We think it's going to be this date, but based on historical information, our trends and inventory, this is where I would keep your level. All that simulation can be done. And then, like I said, continuously event-driven planning and decision-making. So having to do more managing by exception versus having a standard cadence you run through every single day, right? Looking to see when something happens, notifying me so I can manage it more by that exception perspective. And this slide here is really just kind of a visual difference between really the traditional supply chain and what a integrated supply chain looks like now, leveraging the digital transformation function. So traditional supply chains are really a plan and react type of supply chain, whereas a digital supply chain really does a predict and prescribe. So it's looking in the future and predicting what may happen and determining what type of actions do I have. Should I swing this product to another line? Should I look for a different supplier because this one hasn't had good capacity lately? So looking in the future versus waiting and reacting when things may happen. I really like this visual. It just kind of shows what supply chain 4.0 looks like, and supply chain 4.0 is really based on a digitally transformed organization, from grabbing data from an autonomous truck to gathering information from a machine to make better communication to maybe the people managing those machines, predictive shipping of when a product may move, different types of delivery, automatically restocking shelves, all the cool stuff that we're seeing more and more from an efficiency perspective at organizations is shown inside of this full visual. Now, a lot of places don't get here overnight. You kind of pick and choose as you're building out this strategy. What is important to us? Where do we feel we're going to gain the biggest value and maybe the shortest period of time up front? And you kind of pick and choose from these different areas. So it's doesn't have to be a big bang type of approach. And I would argue normally it's never a big bang because there's so many moving pieces. It's more picking your backlog of what you want to accomplish over a period of time. And then as you're building out your strategy, picking from that backlog, running it through different types of agile sprints to create those different efficiencies and gains inside of your organization. So some of those new technologies driving change, like I talked about, mobile, cloud, IoT, AI, machine learning. These are some of the, when you think of digital transformation, these are what I would call the key kind of drivers from a organizational perspective. Mobile has been around for a long time, and it's used in all different types of ways. And as I get into some of the use cases in a second, you'll see what type of options that we have. Same thing with IoT. It's been around for a bit, and there's all different types of ways that we can approach it. So now, and I feel bad because I know I'm PowerPointing you guys to death. We're going to start getting into some actual system processes when we talk about some digital transformation use cases. So these are the 4 that I'm going to be covering today. So first one is going to be around IoT. So how can we do IoT within JD Edwards? And really think of IoT not just as, right, grabbing data from machines. It could be grabbing data from a third-party PLM or grabbing data from a MES or whatever it is, right? It's really just connecting to external systems. And whether that's an IoT device, like a machine on the floor, or that's an MES, which is feeding data from that machine, it doesn't matter. And the process really can be the same based on what your needs are. The second one is mobility options with JDE. So once again, there's a bunch of different options. Some are very simple, some are a little bit more entailed. The third one is system automation. So like I talked about before, process improvement, system automations are two of the key drivers for a digital transformed organization. So how can we remove unnecessary clicks? I'll go through a couple of options. We'll build some of those out. And then finally, what are some edge solutions that pair well with JD Edwards? This is going to be specifically around some of the Oracle-based tools that we're seeing more and more JD Edwards customers looking at, and leveraging kind of a hybrid approach where you take your foundation of JD Edwards, where the majority of the work's done, and then for maybe the areas it doesn't do all that well, looking outside and integrating to, whether it's via Orchestrator or Integration Cloud, or there's all different types of options. So those are the 4 different use cases that we're going to be going through today. And before I jump forward, I'm going to go ahead and just see if there's any questions. Okay, find the questions real quick. Okay, so I have no questions up to this point. So now, once again, we're going to really jump into some different options and use cases around JD Edwards. Okay. So example number 1, once again, how do we integrate IoT, whether it's a third-party system or whatever it looks like? And this is how it's really been done predominantly in the past. So we have our third-party devices, whether it's a machine, third-party app, an MES, whatever it is. In the middle, we'd have to use some significant middleware or business services to then connect to JD Edwards. And this was always a very cumbersome approach. One, because you had to build a lot of logic inside of those middleware tools to have them actually work with inside of JD Edwards. And you know, at the end of the day, there must be a better way. And like most of you know, there is. Orchestrator has absolutely transformed how organizations are doing all different types of processes, but one specifically is integrations, whether, once again, it's an IoT, like you can see over here, a third-party system, an app you built out, mobile applications, whatever it is. And you can leverage Orchestrator to integrate all of those together. And the beauty of the Orchestrator is not just one, it's so user-friendly and easy to use, but it also leverages all of the business logic and business data that you've already built out in JDE. So if you pass in a bad item in integration, guess what? The Orchestrator is going to know, because it's going to have those business logic and business data updates. If I miss a click inside of an orchestration, the business logic is going to know. So you don't have to build all of that logic from scratch. You can do that inside, or you can have Orchestrator do that work for you. And it doesn't have to be just base JDE apps. You can leverage this on custom apps, custom UBEs, anything that the end user can do inside of JD Edwards. And actually, I would argue more than what the end user can do, you can do inside of this process. So these are some of the key components, and I'm going to jump over to the Orchestrator Studio to talk about these in a second. But the key ones are those form requests, data requests, and reports. And from an integration perspective, connectors and connections. Like I said, I'll get into these specifically once I jump into the Orchestrator. But those are the real heavy hitters when we think of different integrations. Okay, so today's example is going to be kind of gathering data. Well, there's a couple examples. The first one, and we did this at a customer of ours, we grabbed data from their telematics system. So they had they were a construction company, and they needed to grab meter readings from all of their machines out on site. So they wanted to know how many hours has it run, how many miles, what's the fuel level, and what's the location of that specific machine. Because when I send someone out to do some work on that asset, the job's 30 miles long. I don't want them to have to hunt and peck for those 30 miles. I want to send them a coordinate and be able to get that information back. All of that was done via just the Orchestrator, and we were grabbing from a third-party API. And the other one is grabbing data from an FTP. So we've done this a lot predominantly in the past, where you drop a file somewhere in a folder and then you consume it. You can now do that with the Orchestrator. And there's some new functionality too with 22 coming out around this. In the past, it's been mostly CSV type of documents, but now you can actually go and do all different types of documents in there and consume them. So I'm sure they talked about, I wasn't on the meeting or the kickoff today, but I'm sure they talked about the JDE 22. Tons and tons of huge features, just a sidebar. I'm really excited to get my hands on it. We haven't been able to get to it yet, but there are definitely some new and advanced Orchestrator features coming out with it. Now, just from a high level, these orchestrations, each one of them is ultimately their own API. Okay, so everyone talks about APIs and hitting APIs, and a lot of the apps that we hit have standard APIs, which is great. But with Orchestrator, you can build your own set of APIs. And each one of those is a way to automate a process inside of JDE, whether it's doing a work order completion, an issue, some hours, passing a sales order update, a purchase order update, whatever you want it to be. And what you can see, it's really simple. It's the AIS server, JDE REST Orchestrator, and then your orchestration name. Now we need to pass in credentials, right? Get the sign on, all that good stuff. But each one of these can be your own API endpoints that you can now connect to from different third-party solutions. So the process of creating an API with your Orchestrator is extremely easy. So I've talked your guys' ear off for 40 minutes now. So we're going to go ahead and jump into some actual software. Up. This one. Okay. So I am now in the Orchestrator Studio. Go ahead and jump in here. Okay. So I'm going to talk about Orchestrator Studio from a 50,000 foot lens. It's always hard, when you do these presentations, you don't know who knows what Orchestrator is, who doesn't. So just a very high level understanding of what it is, what some of the features are. So when we think of orchestrations over here on the left side, this, the way that I always like to explain it is like the shell or the home. So without any components, it really doesn't do anything. It's just a way to house all different types of components together. Now, when I talk about components, that's everything you see in here in green. And some are used significantly more than others. Some of the key ones are these form requests, data requests, reports. So a form request is just a way, think of it like a macro, where an end user goes in and does something inside of JDE Edwards. You can copy that inside of this form request and then systematically have it run inside of an orchestration. So example, if I wanted to do an orchestration to pass data from, maybe I have a PO system and I want to pass in and create those POs inside of JDE Edwards as well, because I need to be able to pay them from a AP perspective. I can create a form request, which goes through the PO entry process, from adding the record to adding in all the detail lines, the quantities, the costs, whatever you want. Click save, and that'll generate that PO inside of JDE. So this is a way to automate or to process this like an end user would. Like I said, the best explanation for this is it's like a macro on steroids from an Excel perspective. A data request, this is if I want to grab data to use inside of an orchestration. So in a similar example, if I want to be able to create a PO very easily for an item inside of JDE, I may not know in that specific application that I'm in what supplier is their primary supplier. I can run an orchestration which pulls back the primary supplier inside of the application to allow me to use that field. So this is me pulling data back to leverage it in steps in my orchestration. Maybe I want to go and look to see if I have any negative inventory and then do something if that happens, or see if I'm clocked into a job. And if I am, clock me out. That's where these data requests are leveraged. It's a way to pull information to use in future steps from an orchestration perspective. Reports, this is like running a UBE, whether it's like 31410, work order processing, 43500, PO print. This is a way to run a report, and I'll show you, there's some examples that we're going to be talking about later of how you can actually leverage this. The other key ones we see a lot are connectors and connections. So connectors and connections is how we create that handshake to whatever we are connecting to, whether it's an FTP or a database, and then also determining, let's say it's a document we're consuming, what is the document headers, what type of rows are we going to be consuming, where should we pass these values to, blah, blah, blah. Custom requests, these are, if you can do custom Groovy scripting or Java scripting. This is also where you can hit business functions directly, which is came out probably about a year or so ago. That was a nice feature everyone really liked. But this is doing some more custom functionality if the standard orchestrator functions can't do what you want it to do. And then the last two, I'll kind of hit on messaging. This is if you want to send an email out to whether it's a vendor or someone on the floor or someone internally. And then also rules. So rules are just true falses, which allows me to kind of direct the path of where the orchestration may go inside of JDE. So to give you a quick visual of how these components are kind of used, here is a clock in orchestration. So what you're going to see just from a high level, these are some of the key components I talked about. So the first one, this is a custom business function call where I'm going to find the actual time. And then the next thing I'm doing is a open labor step. I'm going and doing a request to say, am I clocked into any job? So this is a data request. I then have a rule that says if I am clocked in, clock me out, which is a form request, and then also run post my hours. If I'm not clocked in, just go ahead and clock me in. So once again, this is that culmination of all those different components used inside of a single orchestration. Okay, from custom to data request to a rule, a form request, a batch job report, and then once again another form request. So you can get as crazy as you want. Some are complex and some are very simple. Let's see, I want to do something like printing a PO, and we'll talk about this one a little bit later on. I can have just a two-step. So you can make these simple, you can make them complex. It's just, once again, dependent on your specific needs. Okay, so for the example right now, we're going to talk about how we can connect to whether it's an FTP, third-party API, and what that ultimately looks like. Okay, so I'm going to come in here real quick. Oh, actually, I want that one. So there's all different types of these connections. And once again, this is that handshake. So whether it's a database connection, an FTP connection, if I show you in here, you can see kind of the different options that we have. FTP, database, REST, orchestration, open API, which is a fairly new functionality that's come out. Now with these, for this example, if I were to pull up this guy here. So this is an FTP, and this is where I put in my host, my port, my username and password. Is it a secure FTP? What file should I be pulling it from? So this, once again, is that handshake that I'm creating. If I'm connecting to a third-party database, same type of thing. This is just making sure that whatever I'm doing is secure and I have the credentials to do it. Okay. Now, this is the foundation of how I create the actual connector. So if I go back to my connector, and to show you an example of kind of how this works, I go into this orchestration here. This is a meter reading. So I have this connector that first goes out. What you're going to notice in here is I am hitting that connection, right, that I talked about. So this is that FTP. Orchestrator FTP Sandbox. I am receiving a file, which is named machine hours CSV. And then these are the columns in my specific file. You can make this whatever you want. You can have as many records as you want. You can remove the source every time you process it. So let's say this is an integration where you're dropping a file and you want to consume it and then remove that source. You can remove it to where it doesn't try and get processed again, or you can move it to another area, whatever you want it to be. But this is where you're determining, once again, kind of that handshake between the process. So once I've created my handshake, all I have to do is create a form request, which goes into the actual application and does the update. So in this example, we are doing speed meter readings, okay? And one thing to remember when you create these, especially when you're pulling from an Excel document, you're going to want to make sure to create this or to select the iterate over, okay? So iterate over is just a way for me to process more than a single row. So if I have an Excel doc with 1,000 rows, it's going to run through all 1,000 rows and make those updates, okay? So this is a lot of times what happens. People are like, oh my gosh, why is it not doing all the rows? It's because you may not have the iterate over on. So I currently have a file out on an FTP, and to go in and run this, all I'd have to do is click run. And you'll see for each of those individual Excel rows, it's going to pass in my information. So equipment, what the description is, the hours, same type of thing. And this is 10 or 15 rows, give or take. You can run thousands of rows. And like I said, if you want to use this as an integration tool, great. A lot of people use this just as a way to update data, whether they want to update CAT codes or update costs or pricing, or a huge sales order they want to enter in, or a huge purchase order they want to enter in, and they want to do it from Excel. These are ways that you can do that. Where we normally see this, once again, is from a integration perspective. But if you want to use it more as an automation option too, to get things updated, you can certainly do that. So something as simple as coming through, creating a connection and a connector, creating a form request and dropping a file on an FTP allows me to really automate the process of gathering this data. So instead of the way that it worked before with the customer who was gathering this data from meter readings, is they would have to have someone walk the site every single day and get the hours for all the machines, which obviously was very time consuming. By the end of the day, the hours were wrong because they're running all day long, and they couldn't really do any pre-planning of where the asset was from a maintenance perspective. By leveraging the orchestrator, they're now able to gather in real time where it was, how many hours were on it, how many miles were on it, and then they would also be able to kick off meter readings, which would generate PM schedules. So when they went out, they knew what they had to go work on, and they were all real time. And the process was very, very easy. And the orchestrator is what was the glue to allow us to do that. So huge value. And once again, whether it's grabbing it from an API, an Excel document, hitting it outbound, pulling it inbound, all of that can be done leveraging this orchestrator tool. Any questions on that? It's always hard for me to see this chat. Okay. So I'm going to go quickly back. Here. All right, so the next thing is going to be around mobility. And actually what we'll do, we're at 2:22. Why don't we take 5? I'll give everyone a 5-minute break. I'll come back at around 2:28 and we'll rock through the rest of it. I don't want to, this is a better stopping point because this one will go for a little bit. So let's stop here, take a second, and then we'll restart back up in 5 minutes. All right, so that's been 5. I'm going to go ahead and jump back into it. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is some of the mobility options from a JDE Edwards perspective. Now, the first option is ultimately you can go through the process of kind of building your own front-end mobile tool, right? So pick whatever third-party app accelerator that you want to leverage, utilize Orchestrator as that middleware platform, and then update JDE. Now, this doesn't have to be a super complex process, right? It can be the quote-unquote poor man's mobile solution where you create a very simplistic, maybe it's a complete work order front end. You scan a barcode, it then hits an orchestration to automatically go and update JDE Edwards. Another option is you leverage a Oracle type of tool to build out your front end. What they are kind of pushing towards as they've moved away from those standard mobile apps, which I think everyone would kind of admit weren't all that useful or utilized, is leveraging the Visual Builder cloud service. So this Visual Builder is a way to, once again, hook in via the Orchestrator, but leverage kind of that front end mobile app builder, leverage the Orchestrator integrated in, and allow you to do your different functions inside of JDE. And then the third one, this is really the most simplistic one, but at the end of the day, a lot of people on the floor just need to have a way to walk around with JDE Edwards and to easily process transactions. So with the new features and functions from the newer tools with orchestrations and personal forms and even grids, which have been around forever, you can now kind of build your own mobile-esque form without having to use anything outside of JDE. And that's going to be the example we walk through really quickly and just kind of show how easy this can be. So we'll go ahead and get back here. Okay, so let's go ahead jump into JDE real quick. And we're going to use an example of wanting to do clock in and clock out on the shop floor. Okay, so we've got an app here, dispatch list. Out of the box, you know, is it all that complicated? No, but there's a lot of values in here, and there's no real clock in, clock out functionality. So once again, using a couple very simplistic field and form functionality, I can make this very mobile centric. So if I were to come in here, let's start with the basic, right? Let's do our mobile. Let's go ahead and add some of the values and get down to only what's important to us. So we want to know the order. We'll do the operation sequence, do remaining quantity and hours. And one of the things too, you'll notice is there's this default for mobile devices. So I always select this once again if I'm doing it on the mobile device. Click save. This mobile application. So now I've got a little bit of a simpler form. Now, if I just want to make these a little bit smaller, easy enough. Now, all of this, once again, personal form or grids have been around forever, but this is really the first step, right, of kind of determining mobile view. Now let's change kind of what this form looks like. Let's add in some clock in, clock out functionality. So with form extensions, we can now add different buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this and add a few buttons. So we'll name this clock in. Add another one. This one. Clock out. And now I'm going to associate orchestrations to these clicks. Okay, so these are orchestrations that are the ones I showed you earlier, but just to show you how to attach these, I determine it brings me up this associate orchestration visual view. I say, what is my control or my trigger? I select clock in. I then determine what orchestration am I going to call. So I do work order clock in. I map my order number. And I'm not going to pass any inputs or outputs back. And that's it. And I can do the same process once again for clock out. So just kind of showing how easy it is to do this. Clock out. Next, map my order number. Save, close. Okay, just back down. So now I have two buttons for clock in, clock out. I've made my grid much easier. If I click save, I now have these buttons associated to my page. Fine. And just because this is going to annoy me. Okay. So now I've got a very simplistic view. Now, if I were to come onto my iPad, which I'll pull up and show you. Switch my screen. And Fernando, I just saw you put a chat in, so I'll answer that in 1 second. Okay, so this is JD Edwards on the iPad. So I can come in here, log in like this was standard JDE. Go to So I can come in here, right? This is JD Edwards on an iPad. If I were to come to my favorites, and go to dispatch list, well, now look, this is, right? Is it full-blown mobile? No, but from here, I can do clock in, clock out. I have a very simplistic view. I could take more of these fields away if I wanted. And once again, clock in, as simple as clocking in. And then the same type of thing. I want to clock out. Boom. So very, very easy to do. And this is no code, right? No third-party apps. By bringing everything internally to JDE, I can do that process significantly more efficiently and roll this out to people on the floor without having to make huge investments. All right, so Fernando, let's see, I'm just reading your question. The clock and clock out button specific for users, or once I add them, they will appear to the different users that use the same applications where the buttons were added. So good question. So all of these features that I'm showing you, whether it's the clock in, clock out, which is using personal forms, it's dependent on how you share them. So if you share them to users, everyone in that shared role will see it. But it's really just like all the other UDOs, like grids and orchestrations and queries. If you share them, you can share them to other specific roles. If not, it's for whoever the person is that is creating it. Good question. Anyone else? For the buttons, so Jason, for the buttons, can they also call a form/row exit? So when you say, can they also call a form or row exit, maybe explain what you mean by that. We've been asked this by our user base, just curious. So are you asking to call a row exit, which is like a UBE, or actually to pop up to a row exit? What are you looking for specifically? Okay, so in sales order entry, the user wants a button to go to item availability. Oh, so yeah, that to me wouldn't be a button. So I'll show you that example in a second. Same type of functionality. Let me go ahead and share JDE back here. I love questions, so keep them coming. So let me go ahead and show you really quickly in that scenario what I would do. So you don't need to, I'm not going to use sales order entry, but just for your example, if I were to come to something like the P4310, so in here, there is a new manage exits. So you can actually add your own row and form exits. So in your example, you said you wanted to go from sales order entry, they want a button to go to item availability. Well, what you could do is just add a row exit here, which brings me to item availability. So you can add your own row and form exits inside of that row. And this can be a pop-up, it can be modeless, it can be all different options, but this is if you want to get from one application to another very quickly. Now, Cafe One's another example too, but that's usually if you just want to see them at the same time. So hopefully that answers your question. Anyone else? Okay, great. All right. So we'll jump back and PowerPoint. Okay. So now we're going to be talking about some system automation, removing clicks. For today's example is going to be the ability to kind of really automate the process of communicating POs to vendors. So you can use Orchestrator to automatically print the PO by a button and also send it to the vendor with the attachment of that PO. You can also put in things inside of that email, things like confirm receipt, acknowledge whatever you want. If they click on that, it will automatically update the PO inside of JD Edwards. So this is just one of those examples of how can I automate that process. I'll also show you an example around a work order shortage and how that functioning can happen. Okay, so this is once again us going to be adding a print PO. And then this is going to be the example of the type of email that I would receive when I go and click that button. All right, so let's bounce back over. And before I do that, any questions? Share. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back. Go to my planning page. And I'll show you the orchestration behind this one as well. It's very simple. But if I come in here to open purchase orders, get a drink real quick. Okay, so inside of here, if I want to add a button which goes and prints and sends a purchase order to a vendor, all I have to do, similar to what we did before, right, with the mobile app, utilizing form extension. I'm going to add a button, which is print and send PO. We're going to associate an orchestration to it. And once again, I'll show you the back end of this orchestration. I'm going to map my order number. Save. Those. Okay. Oh, I just got another question, so let me pause real quick. So on JDE for iPad, did you use a browser in the same link as on the computer browser, or was it an app? One needs to be installed from the App Store. So good question. So that was an app that I installed on the App Store. Now, to get to it, what you can do is just go to a browser in your iPad, like Chrome, and when you select and put that URL in for your standard JDE Edwards, it'll pop up and say, do you want to open the app? Do you want to download the app? So you don't have to use it. I do think it's a little bit easier to navigate. Some of the buttons in there are more mobile friendly, but it is an app that I used. Okay, so if I come in here, open purchase orders. Let's say I select this one. Print. As that is going, I'm going to quickly just come over to my email. Whole switching sharing is always full. Okay. Maybe it's telling me I shouldn't be showing my email. There we go. Okay. It's not letting me show it. Let me try it to reshare real quick. Okay. Man, that was like doing brain surgery. So you'll see here, I get this email and it pops in. It sends me my document. It sends me the PO. If I have any concerns, blah, 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 send it to me directly. And then I can confirm this directly inside of this order or inside of this email. I click this, it will automatically kick off an orchestration, which I can allow it to update a PO. I can have it notify me as a buyer. So this is me passing, once again, and since I do it this way, so you can actually see the preview. If I come here, you'll see it will show me that exact PO that I just printed. So pretty neat. And this is with anything. You can attach, you run a UBE, you can attach it to an email and send it directly without any type of very hard, meticulous steps. It's if I jump over and show you how to build this. So over here in my Orchestrator Studio, this is that orchestration, and I showed you it earlier. So the first one is me running the batch job. So I run the batch job, I pick my version. Now you can pass in versions, which is new. Also, I can now, you can see here, this is how I would pass my document number into my UBE. So I can grab a value on a line, pass it into a UBE and run it. Once I do that, I can have it send this email. Now these emails can be, like you can see, I just did it directly to my email, but you can do an address book, you know, the who's who, you can do a distribution group, you can do all different types of things. You can do carbon copy, blind copies. This is me passing in some string values, excuse me, inside of the actual payload. Now, when we talk about attaching a document, you'll see down here there's this little attachments. And what you need to do is pass in your length text, job number, and server. And I'll show you that once we back up. But this is how the system knows which document to grab and attach to that specific email. And then these are these other links I talked about. So if I wanted to send a notification when this happens, this is me adding that line. So I click on this, it automatically selects that URL and kicks it off like an endpoint API. And this can be whatever you want, right? So this is a very simplistic example of communications with a vendor, but this a lot of times is what happens. You have to email them the PO, and then all they do is respond back and say, got it, or whatever it is. Well, now you can automate that. That's just one less thing that you have to do at the end of the day. So when I talk about the mapping with this one, you can see job number, and anytime you run a job, if I click this drop down, you'll see there is a output. So when I run a job, there's always the output of the report name, the report version, the job number, and the execution server. So all I'm doing is mapping those values to where they need to go. So job number to job number, server to server, document number is the purchase order number that I passed in. And then you can see in your link text, I'm just passing the email purchase order print report name. And then this is the passing into the notification. Okay, so it's really easy. The output of what you need to send it in an email comes out of the box. So you don't have to do any fancy manipulations to get it. Any questions on attaching a document or report to an email, or any maybe use cases that you want to ask if they'd be applicable, or you could use the same type of feature? All right. Okay, so let's jump back over. We're getting close to wrapping up. I'm going to talk about the last part for today. Okay. All right. So the last thing for today is going to be talking about kind of example number 4, which is some edge products that work well with JDE. Okay. So if I go through these just very quickly, you know, this is the visual view of kind of all the stacks that are in the Oracle Cloud solution from CX to HCM, ERP, SCM. On the bottom here too, you're going to notice there's a lot of those digital transformation technologies that I talked about, from AI to machine learning, autonomous database, blockchain. So all of those are kind of built into each of the feature functions here. Now, this is a visual view that we actually put together when we were comparing some JD Edwards to cloud functionality. So this visual here is showing kind of JD Edwards, base phones, what the functionality is from a very macro level, right? High level. And then we talked about, okay, where does maybe a cloud external platform have some advantages? Things like supplier portals, invoice match, payables, because there is some OCR type of technology, the ability to do your easy closing from a financial perspective. So this is where there's some different benefits. And then also when we think of what does maybe a third-party cloud solution have that JD Edwards doesn't have, anything in light blue is that visual. So you can kind of see based on the different areas where a third-party app would be very beneficial to JDE. So the one we're seeing more and more of is leveraging the planning solution and also the PLM solution, which really fall into similar areas. So JD Edwards, and I love JDE, I'm a JDE guy at heart, but planning from a constraint-based perspective and capacity perspective, even forecasting, isn't the best. And also the process of deploying products, managing innovation, that really has some inefficiencies there. Now, Orchestrator helps in some of those areas, but it really isn't a great tool in those key areas. So we're seeing more and more people look kind of around the edges for some of the planning tools. And some of the reasons why are the ability to do what if analysis, constraint-based planning. So, not doing unconstrained planning like what JD Edwards does today, production scheduling, drag and drop. There's a lot of different features associated to it that is kind of driving people to move in that direction. Now, if we talk about a couple of these from a high level, so Oracle Supply Chain Planning Network, this is a visual all across the board where it's more similar to the digital supply chain we talked about earlier, where it's really managing by exception, grabbing data from IoT, doing simulations, having the system look in the background and manage my supply, looking across all different facilities and saying, hey, you have extra material here. Why don't you send it over to the other facility because they're going to need it? It's really iterating all of that supply chain. And the big piece, once again, is it is doing it in a either unconstrained or constrained fashion. So I can have the system give me realistic dates based on my inventory levels, my labor, and also my machine run, and also things like floor capacity. If I can only hold so many X's on the floor, and I want to make sure the system doesn't put more in, those are things that we can do from a supply planning perspective. Demand planning is similar, it's just on the front end. So this is more looking at all of the historical data based on some IoT, past history, usages. This is me planning long lead time procured parts and doing much more detailed analysis to say what is the plan for me building forward, and really creating that predictive forecast and allowing me to drive this and replenish my demands down to that lower level. The Oracle Supply Planning, this is taking that demand plan and driving all of my action items. So from buying material to building products to all the planning, all of the key pieces that is being driven from a supply chain perspective. This also leverages a very intuitive backlog planning tool, which really helps you to manage by exception, look at the orders that are going to drive the biggest issues if I don't fulfill them. So tons and tons of really cool tools inside of here that JD Edwards doesn't have the ability to ultimately do. Communication in between facilities too. So we talked about kind of the simple way we can do orchestrations to talk to vendors or talk to IoT. But if you want to get very in tuned where you're grabbing a supplier's capacity, or you want to know when something on the floor happens or is planning, doing some machine learning to plan when it may happen. All of that is really more of a cloud-centric tool. JDE Edwards doesn't have a lot of that out of the box from a real-time, deep learning, machine learning type of functionality. And then the other thing too, production scheduling. So there is, the work center load calendar in JDE, but they actually just released fairly recently an Oracle production scheduling tool, which is drag and drop, finite scheduling. You can see it goes down to the time level. So you can actually look, you can add in downtime, you can, have different capacities. And what this is doing is allowing you to create, feasible schedules, improving that factory and delivery performance, decreasing your inventory, and allowing yourself to be a more proactive shop floor than a reactive shop floor. Now everyone asks, okay, if you do that, Brian, how do you integrate it? And this is something we do all the time, whether it's via Orchestrator, OIC, Del Boomi. There's all different types of options. So you really pick your tool. We mostly see people leveraging Oracle tools like Orchestrator or OIC just because it stays within kind of the Oracle stack and they all play well together, but you can really do whatever you want. And the integration is fairly straightforward, back and forth, inbound, outbound. So I can pass all my sales from JDE Edwards out to a planning tool, do all my planning, send all my updates in, and that can all be done via the integration process. All right, so getting towards the end, how do you create this transformation roadmap, and what are the steps? And everyone kind of has their own methodology, but from a high level, this is always the plan that I usually like to take when we come in and help organizations. So the first thing is we're going to want to have a very focused assessment on your current state. And we usually try and take a specific area, whether it's supply chain or customer service or shop floor. Looking across everything is an option, but it usually doesn't add as much value as fast as if you take a very strategic approach. So first, kind of doing an assessment. What is your current state? What are your problems? Determining and understanding what are some opportunities that you have around digital transformation. Can you use some IoT? Would it help you with mobility help? How do we, if we automated this specific process, if we could give the customer service an easy way to know a date of when a product will be done? All those types of situations are pieces that we can build out. From there, determining what are the business cases. We need to have a business case, right? Why is this going to help us? What is it going to bring to us? What type of ROI from an organization are you going to gain by taking this on? Getting commitment from the business. Usually this is or executive commitment to where, hey, we're making this decision, we're moving forward, we have that strategic leader in place, and we are going to drive towards this change. And at the end of the day, nothing is going to stop us. You need to have that commitment to make sure that you are moving efficiently. Implement that change. And usually this implementation is done in an agile type of form where, right, you're doing a couple week sprints, rolling out small pieces, and then building up. And you can see here that review/recycle. You create that backlog like I talked about earlier. You then pick from that backlog what is important to you and how you drive your change based on what those needs are. So this is how we normally, right, when we come in and help organizations build these out, run through this kind of roadmap. And this, it can be tweaked, right, based on what your needs are, but this is usually the way that we try and tackle it. Okay, so like I said, we do come in and do these Pathfinder assessments. We're coming towards the end. So if you do want to learn more about this, either reach out to me directly, or you can go to pathfinder.com or pathfinder@trillium.com. We've been doing this for a ton of organizations. It's really been the huge buzz, whether they're looking to improve, look at different technologies, look at organizational change. We can really help out with all of that. So if you do need anything or want any help, I would love to chat with you about this. It really is something I enjoy to do. So please feel free to reach out. Some more of the quick quest slides. This is how you can contact me, brose@trillium.com. Please reach out if you have any questions. Like I said, I'd love to chat with you and then kind of talk about how Orchestrator or these technologies can help your organization. I'm going to jump over to some of my chat, see if I see anything. Okay, so I see, is what you showed today available pre-JDE release 22? Yeah, so Rusty, good question. I am showing the release that I was using was 9253, but all of this should be done, or you should be able to get to around 925. So yeah, this is all pre-release 9220. Oh, Joanne, sorry, I didn't see your question. It says, is it possible to see the confirmed PO link as of what it does? Yeah, so the example of does it update the PO status as confirmed, that's dependent on how you set up the orchestration. So the way that I have it right now, it just sends a notification. You can have it do whatever you want. So when you build out that confirmation step or the link that you build out, you say, what orchestration do I want it to call? If I want it to call and do maybe put an order on hold, or I want to have it update a status, you really get to pick and choose. So it's more based on your use case. It's not like it's a standard function. With all these orchestrations, you build them out how you'd like. Okay, so that's all that I had. Anyone else, any questions for today? Elizabeth, does JDE deliver any orchestrations, or are they all custom? Yeah, Elizabeth, out of the box, you'll get, I don't know the exact number of orchestrations that you get, but there are some that come with base JDE. What I would say is not many people leverage them just because they're somewhat generic. So usually if you do use them, it's more to copy them and make changes to them. But there certainly are some that come out of the box, but the power of that orchestrator is you really get to kind of have it do what you want. Sergio, okay, so going back to when you showed connections and connectors to external IoT vendor systems, how do you manage DV, PY, PD with the Orchestrator Studio? Do you have multiple orchestrations? Yeah, so that process is a little bit clunky. You need to update between those different environments, and it's hard to explain over this because there's a lot of steps. But if you want to reach out directly, please feel free to get with me at brose@trillium.com. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate your time. Like I said, if you need anything, please feel free to reach out, and enjoy the rest of the conference.